Cyber thieves stole $81 million from the Bangladesh Bank.
বাংলাদেশ ব্যাংক থেকে নতুন করে কয়েক বিলিয়ন ডলার চুরি গেছে।
In 2016, during a seemingly ordinary weekend in Bangladesh, where the work week ends on Saturday, employees at the Central Bank of Bangladesh made a chilling discovery. Their standard printer, which handles international transfer receipts, began printing documents confirming a staggering billion-dollar transaction had been drained from the bank's accounts. In that surreal moment, the staff realized they were at the center of the largest digital heist in history. Their security had been compromised by a notorious hacking organization known for breaking into the world's most secure digital defenses. This shadowy group, supported by a shockingly powerful entity, will be revealed at the end of the video. As always, make sure to follow the story to the very end. Bangladesh is a Muslim-majority country where the weekend falls on Friday and Saturday. It is well known that banks close over the weekend. During these days, only essential staff, particularly those responsible for managing international transfers, work at the Central Bank of Bangladesh. You may have heard of the SWIFT system or SWIFT code before. SWIFT is a Belgian company that provides a global network allowing banks worldwide to communicate. For example, if a client in one country wants to transfer money to a client in another country, the transaction must go through the SWIFT system because it allows the banks to communicate and confirm the transfer of funds. This entire process is digital, meaning no physical money moves from one bank to another. To ensure these transactions are accurate and secure, a reliable network like SWIFT is crucial. However, today's story isn't about a breach of the SWIFT system itself. SWIFT is known to be highly secure, as it should be, given its importance to global banking transactions. So, what exactly happened at the Central Bank of Bangladesh? As we mentioned, Friday and Saturday are the weekend days in Bangladesh. During this time, all bank employees are off, except for a few essential staff members, including the one responsible for managing the SWIFT system for international transfers. These transactions are recorded digitally on computers and also printed out by a bank printer to keep a printed record of the transfers. The SWIFT system and international transfers operate 24 hours a day. On Thursday, when employees finished their work at 5 p.m., they left the bank and locked up. The next day, Friday, only the essential employees came in. The staff member responsible for the SWIFT transfers went to the printer to check the transactions that had come through overnight, as there would undoubtedly have been transfers. In the morning, he expected the printer to have been working all night, printing transactions as they were processed, even if they occurred in the middle of the night. However, on the morning of February 5, 2016, when he went to check the printer, he found no printed documents. It was puzzling because it seemed impossible that no transfers had happened overnight. Where were the papers? Why hadn't they printed? Besides the missing prints, there was a digital log on the computer showing the transactions that appeared to have occurred the previous night, and there was nothing suspicious about these transactions. It seemed that the issue was solely with the printer. It simply wasn't printing. They spent all of Friday trying to fix the printer problem, but the printer did not respond. It wouldn't even turn on. Eventually, at the end of the workday, they decided to go home and leave the printer as it was. They assumed it was just a technical glitch with the printer, and since the technical staff were not considered essential, they wouldn't be back until Sunday. The essential staff and the transfer operations employees returned on the following day, Saturday, while the rest of the bank staff were still off. They continued trying to fix the printer, which still wasn't responding. However, after several hours of effort, the printer suddenly started working and began printing out all the transfer documents that had accumulated from Thursday night to Saturday morning. The employees expected the printer to print the same transactions that were recorded in the digital log on the computer, but to their shock, among the printed transactions were 35 that did not appear in the digital log, totaling approximately $951 million, nearly $1 billion. Where did these transactions come from? And why weren't they recorded in the digital log? These transfer requests had been sent to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York because the Central Bank of Bangladesh holds an account there, containing billions as part of the national reserves. Essentially, this money is part of the country's reserve funds. But now, requests have been officially sent from the bank's SWIFT system to the Federal Reserve to transfer $1 billion to various accounts, all located in the Philippines. This revelation threw the bank staff into panic. Who authorized these transfers, and how were they initiated? But before they could address these questions, they needed to stop the damage while amidst their confusion. They quickly reviewed the transfer requests and discovered 4 transactions totaling $81 million had already been sent to the Philippines. However, 31 transactions, constituting the bulk of the billion, had not yet been processed. Their urgent task was to safeguard the remaining amount and prevent it from leaving their accounts at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. They immediately tried to contact the Federal Reserve, but unfortunately, it was Saturday in America, and the weekend there meant no one would likely respond until Monday. The bank employees then reached out to SWIFT, the company responsible for the transfers, who advised them to shut down their transfer system. This required approval from the central bank's director, but when the employees contacted the director, his reaction was unexpected and dismissive. He refused to shut down the system, suggesting the issue might be a minor error that would be corrected soon. Regrettably, the director did not treat the situation with the seriousness it warranted, and it likely wouldn't have made a difference even if he had. The following day, Sunday, the central bank employees and the director returned to work, as their work week started on Sunday. However, America was still on the weekend, so they couldn't communicate with the Federal Reserve. In any case, the Federal Reserve would likely not process the remaining 31 transactions until communication was established. The bigger issue was the $81 million already transferred to accounts in the Philippines. They tried to reach the Philippine bank involved in these transfers, but like in the U.S., it was the weekend in the Philippines, Saturday and Sunday, so they received no response. The biggest problem was that they wouldn't be able to work on Monday, meaning they could only resume on Tuesday due to the Chinese New Year holiday. You might wonder why the Philippines observes the Chinese New Year. It's because of the strong cultural ties between the Philippines and China. Therefore, the Central Bank of Bangladesh wouldn't be able to communicate with the Philippine bank until Tuesday. Now we started to see a very clever pattern the thieves or hackers followed. They executed the theft on a Thursday night, just before the weekend in Bangladesh. They stole from the U.S. reserves, which are on a weekend break on Saturday and Sunday, and transferred the money to a bank in the Philippines, which was off on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. This timing was not coincidental. It was a crucial and smart part of their plan to disrupt communication between the banks for as long as possible, giving themselves the largest window to successfully complete their operation. After all attempts at communication failed, the staff at the Central Bank of Bangladesh had no choice but to resort to emailing the Philippine bank, requesting them to freeze the accounts that received the transferred amounts. They explained in the emails that the funds were theirs and had been stolen and transferred illegally from their account. The management at the Central Bank of Bangladesh was helpless. Time was passing, and they didn't know how to handle the disaster. Bangladesh, being one of the poorest countries in the world, would face severe economic repercussions from losing $1 billion. Before we continue to discover what happened after the theft, let's first understand how these hackers managed to breach the bank's transfer system. The hackers initially targeted the U.S. Federal Reserve because many countries keep part of their reserves in dollars there. However, the Federal Reserve's systems are extremely secure, making a breach almost impossible. The same goes for the SWIFT network system, which we previously mentioned is also highly secure. However, the weakest link in this network are the banks themselves, since each bank is responsible for its internal security systems. Where then could hackers find the weakest security system to breach? Often, it would be in poorer countries like Bangladesh, which may not have the expertise or budget to enhance their security systems to the level of other nations. Does this mean that breaching the security system of the Central Bank of Bangladesh was easy? Certainly not, and this breach did not happen overnight. The hackers had infiltrated the bank more than a year before the day of the operation. During that year, they covertly monitored the bank's network, unnoticed. They studied the bank's systems from the inside, analyzing and fully understanding them. So, what steps did the hackers exactly follow to execute this operation? The first step involves what is known as social engineering, sometimes referred to as social hacking, which means studying and understanding your human target, their social behaviors, and general actions. In our era, the best tool for hackers to engage in social engineering is social media. Most people have accounts and post a lot of their personal information online, which hackers exploit. What happened was that the hackers gathered information on about 40 bank employees and then sent them emails. These emails appeared to be from people the employees knew, a detail the hackers obtained from the employees' social media profiles. The emails, mostly job inquiries, would typically say something like, "Hello, I'm looking for a job, and I know you work at the bank. Could you help me see if there are any positions available? Here is my resume attached." When you receive an email like this from someone you know, even remotely, you're likely to download and open the attached file. However, these attachments sent by the hackers contained viruses, though outwardly they appeared to be simple PDF resumes. Once opened, the virus would install itself on the computer. Importantly, these emails were sent to the employees' work addresses, meaning the files were likely opened on work computers. Indeed, several employees downloaded and opened these files, thereby unknowingly initiating the spread of the virus throughout the bank's computer network. This spread was completely undetected, and the employees who opened the files had no reason to suspect anything because they saw what looked like ordinary resumes. This initial breach was more of a human hack than a technical one. Once the virus was on the employees' computers, it came into play. The virus could capture screenshots, record every keystroke made by the employees, and even allow the hackers to control the computers remotely. However, at this point, the hackers were not yet in the attack phase. They were in the information gathering phase. Their ultimate goal was to access the bank's critical computers, specifically those handling international transfers through the SWIFT network, because not every computer in the bank had access to SWIFT. The computers in any bank are connected through a network, and usually, even these internal networks have security standards. The device that connects the computers, called a switch, usually has certain security standards, especially in sensitive institutions like banks. Unfortunately, the switches at the Central Bank of Bangladesh were cheap and had very poor security standards, allowing the hackers to move relatively easily from one computer to another until they found the computer responsible for international transfers, connected to the SWIFT network. This computer was their main target. The hackers made sure all their movements were covered because if any employee discovered or even suspected their presence, it would have jeopardized their entire operation. Their steps were cautious, intricate, and slow. That's why it took them about a year to reach the computer responsible for the bank's transfers, a computer that only a limited number of employees, 2 or 3, could access. The hackers managed to access the computer of one of these employees, from which they obtained the employee's login credentials. This allowed them to enter the computer connected to the SWIFT network. Once they were fully prepared and knew exactly how to execute their plan, they chose the timing carefully. As previously mentioned, they planned to start the attack on the night of Thursday, February 4, 2016. This timing would allow them more freedom to act over the weekend, spanning Friday to Monday, which were consecutive holidays in the countries involved: Bangladesh, the USA, and the Philippines. This schedule would disrupt communication between the banks for a 4-day period. After the workday ended in Bangladesh on that Thursday, the bank employees left at 5 p.m. The hackers, or rather the thieves, remotely accessed the bank's computer at 8:30 p.m., a time when the bank's employees would not be present, allowing them to freely carry out their operation. From this computer, They submitted 35 transfer requests through the SWIFT system to the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The total value of these transactions was approximately $951 million, nearly $1 billion. These requests were sent to the Federal Reserve in New York, where it was 10:30 a.m., so the staff were present and everything seemed normal. The hackers sent these 35 requests and waited for a response from the Federal Reserve. However, the U.S. Federal Reserve relies entirely on the SWIFT system. If a valid request is received through the SWIFT network and all details in the request are correctly filled out, there is no reason for them to deny it, regardless of the large amount involved. The expectation was that all 35 transfers directed by the hackers to a Philippine bank would be processed. However, for some reason, only 4 of these transfers were accepted. The remaining 31 were suspended and placed under review. The 4 transactions that were processed totaled $81 million, a substantial amount that makes this operation one of the largest bank heists in history. The hackers were puzzled as to why the remaining 31 transfers were not executed, and the reason turned out to be quite extraordinary. It was a bizarre coincidence that saved the Central Bank of Bangladesh from an additional loss of $870 million. So, what happened? What was this miraculous coincidence that proved to be a blessing in disguise? First, let's look at the owners of the accounts in the Philippines. Upon tracing these accounts, it was discovered that they were registered under the names of individuals from China. These accounts had been opened 10 months prior to the operation and remained inactive until the day of the heist, when suddenly millions of dollars were transferred into them. The Philippine bank where these accounts were opened was named RCVC, and these accounts were spread across different branches of the bank in the Philippines, including one located on a street called Jupiter, a typical street name in the Philippines. By a curious coincidence, there was another company in a different country, a maritime oil shipping company, also named Jupiter. However, this company dealt with Iran, which is under U.S. sanctions. Consequently, any company dealing with Iran, including this Jupiter company, would be included in the U.S. blacklist. The transfers that were put under review were those directed to the branch of the bank in the Philippines, located on Jupiter Street. The branch address on the transfers triggered a response at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. When they saw the word Jupiter, they put these transfers under review, even though this Jupiter was completely unrelated to the sanctioned one. This remarkable coincidence stopped the 31 transfers totaling $78 million. It was a fortunate mishap for the bank and the Bangladeshi economy, which would have struggled to absorb a $1 billion loss. And this wasn't the only serendipitous event. After the 4 transfers were processed, the hackers waited for the remaining 31. They waited for 7.5 hours while inside the computer and exited the SWIFT system at 6 p.m. in New York time, assuming the working day was over and the remaining transfers would not be processed. However, imagine if they had waited just 1 more hour. They could have accessed the entire $1 billion because some Federal Reserve employees were still at work, reviewing transfers that needed attention. When these employees reviewed the transfers from the Central Bank of Bangladesh and saw that Jupiter Street in the Philippines was unrelated to the sanctioned Jupiter company, they realized stopping these transfers had been just a system error. Usually, the Federal Reserve, relying entirely on the SWIFT system, would process any correct request received through it. If all the data in the request was accurate, they had no reason to reject it, no matter how large the sum. Therefore, all 35 transfers directed by the hackers to a Philippine bank should have been processed. However, upon noticing the enormous sums involved, which were unusual for the Central Bank of Bangladesh, the Federal Reserve decided to seek additional confirmation from the bank. They wondered why such large amounts were being transferred to the Philippines. So they sent a message through the SWIFT system itself, requesting confirmation of the transfers. Were these transactions legitimate? And were the amounts correct? Had the hackers still been active on the system, they could have easily responded through the SWIFT network to confirm the transfers to the Federal Reserve, affirming them as legitimate. Fortunately, the hackers had given up and exited the system just an hour before the Federal Reserve's request for confirmation. Before exiting, they deleted all records of the 35 transactions they had initiated from the bank's digital transaction block. This ensured that when the bank staff arrived the next day, they would be completely unaware of what had happened. Additionally, knowing about the printer that automatically printed all transactions as they occurred, the hackers had disabled the printer before sending these transactions. Since they had already breached the network, they simply installed a virus on the printer to disrupt it. When the few essential employees who worked on Fridays arrived, as mentioned, they found the printer out of service, with no paper printed, and the digital log on the computer showed no suspicious transactions, just the routine daily transactions. Initially, the employees suspected nothing more than a printer malfunction. They were unaware of the disaster until Saturday when they managed to get the printer working again. Suddenly, it printed all the accumulated transactions, including the 35 by the hackers, totaling $1 billion, shocking them as these were not recorded in the digital log. As we mentioned, the management of the Central Bank of Bangladesh and its staff tried to communicate with the Federal Reserve in the U.S. and with RCBC Bank in the Philippines. However, due to the holidays, there was no response, so their only option was to send emails, particularly to the Philippine bank. They requested the bank to freeze the accounts that had received the funds, totaling $81 million. At that moment, the bank's management did not fully understand what had happened. How could transactions have been made from their SWIFT system? Initially, they thought that an actual person had physically entered the bank building, accessed the computer connected to the SWIFT network, and manually executed these transactions from within the bank. They spent over 8 hours reviewing security camera footage, only to be shocked to find that no one, except a janitor, appeared in these recordings. They still did not realize it was a cyber intrusion because there were no physical traces of the intruders, a testament to the hackers' professionalism in covering their tracks. On the other side, as soon as the funds reached the Philippines, the thieves began to act immediately. All these accounts were opened using fake identities. The person at the bank who allowed these accounts to be opened was a branch manager named Maya de Quito. This branch manager was very cooperative with the thieves, not only assisting them in opening the accounts but also preparing significant amounts of cash for them, apparently as part of a pre-arranged agreement. As soon as the $81 million arrived in their accounts, she began arranging as much cash as possible. She even requested large cash amounts from neighboring bank branches to her own. By the end of the week, on Friday, she managed to convert $22 million into the local Philippine currency, the peso. Given that the peso is a small denomination, $22 million in pesos meant over 1 million banknotes, a very substantial amount of cash. The manager distributed this cash into boxes, and bank employees saw her personally handling these boxes, accompanied by some individuals. They loaded the boxes into a Lexus LX and then drove off with the money. The thieves thus managed to convert 22 million of the 81 million into cash in their hands, leaving 59 million still in the bank. We will return to the remaining 59 million later. Now the question is, were these funds secure in their hands? Could they just take it and use it as they wish? The answer, of course, is no. Since this money could be traced, it all came from the same bank and had serial numbers. They needed to launder it to make it untraceable. This was an additional reason for choosing the Philippines, known for its numerous unregulated casinos and gambling halls. These venues see hundreds of millions of dollars circulate daily without any financial oversight, providing an ideal environment for money laundering. What happened was that the thieves distributed the money among a group of 10 to 15 people, all from China. These individuals were likely not part of the core team that executed the operation, but were hired and paid to carry out a specific task. They were to take the money to a casino and start the money laundering process. Upon entering the casino, they would exchange the cash they had for casino chips. This effectively changed the form of their money. When they returned the chips to the casino, They exchanged them back into cash, receiving different bills that could not be traced back to the original cash taken from the bank. Casinos generally do not concern themselves with the origins of the money, especially in the Philippines, where there is no financial oversight. It was not unusual for foreigners, particularly from China, to bring large sums of money to gamble, especially during the Chinese New Year holiday. However, the question arises, when they gamble, how do they ensure they don't lose the money? The simple strategy was that they played amongst themselves. For instance, 5 of them might sit at the same table, with no outsiders joining them. Whether they won or lost, the money stayed within their group, and the casino only took a small commission, perhaps 1 or 2%, when the chips were exchanged for cash. This commission was a trivial expense for the benefit of laundering their money, so these individuals continued to play and launder money. During this time, the Central Bank of Bangladesh was still trying to make contact with the Philippine bank. Finally, on Tuesday after the Chinese New Year holiday had ended, employees of RCBC Bank returned to work. From the start of the business day, the Central Bank of Bangladesh tried every possible means to contact the management of the Philippine bank. It took them 5 hours after work began to reach a senior official at the bank. During those 5 hours, every person they spoke with would refer them to someone else, even though they stressed that the matter was urgent and involved millions of dollars at stake. Shockingly, when they finally reached this senior official, they discovered that all of the $81 million in the accounts had been withdrawn. $22 million had been withdrawn on Friday, as orchestrated by the branch manager, and the remaining $59 million was withdrawn that Tuesday morning. During those 5 hours while the Central Bank of Bangladesh was trying to reach a bank official, the thieves coordinated with the branch manager, who had assisted them previously, and arranged to withdraw the remaining $59 million, which she facilitated just as she had the first time. This time, gathering the cash was even easier for her since it was the beginning of the work week, unlike the previous occasion, which was at the end of the week. It is puzzling why the Central Bank of Bangladesh didn't send representatives to the Philippines to be at the bank when it opened on Tuesday to directly request the senior manager to freeze the accounts immediately. This would have prevented the thieves from having a full 5 hours to withdraw the remaining $59 million. It is possible that in those initial days, they did not fully grasp the situation, thinking it was merely a mistake that would be easily corrected. This was a remarkably lax response from them. Ultimately, the $81 million was lost, and the news spread quickly worldwide, becoming a major story covered by all media outlets. It was dubbed the biggest digital heist in history. But the question remains, who was behind this elaborate and massive operation? Investigations into the case continued for a long time, involving several security agencies from Bangladesh, the USA, and the Philippines. Initially, they had no idea who the hackers were. As mentioned, the hackers were skilled at covering their tracks, but they couldn't erase everything. Some traces remained, which required experts to uncover. After thorough examinations by security and tech experts, they found strong similarities between the malware used in the bank hack and malware used in a previous hack against Sony in 2014. This hack was the most significant breach in the company's history. It disrupted their networks, devices, and systems, striking a severe blow to the corporation. The group responsible for this attack was known as Lazarus. Why did Lazarus target Sony? Some of you may remember this incident because it made a lot of noise at the time. Sony had produced a film called The Interview, a comedy about 2 journalists who traveled to North Korea to interview its leader, Kim Jong-un. The film portrayed Kim in a satirical manner, which upset the real Kim Jong-un, leading to numerous threats from North Korea against Sony, demanding that the film not be shown or there would be serious consequences. Indeed, the film was pulled from most cinemas worldwide due to these serious threats, including threats to bomb or shoot up theaters. However, there was a public demand online for the film to be released, so Sony made it available for purchase or viewing online. The Lazarus Group after that paralyzed Sony's networks and systems, forcing employees to resort to pen and paper as if they had been thrown back 50 years. Moreover, they leaked thousands of files and emails between employees, managers, and even celebrities associated with Sony. Some of these emails contain scandals and derogatory information. It is evident that Lazarus is from North Korea and likely has direct connections to the regime. Their exact nature is unclear. Are they regular employees in North Korea, or perhaps a mercenary team paid by the North Korean government? But what is certain and clear is that Lazarus is supported and managed by North Korea. Imagine that specific codes found within the malware in the Bangladesh Bank hack matched codes used in the Sony breach. Security experts assert that such a match could only occur if the same individuals were behind both operations. This makes sense given the complexity and scale of the incidents, from a year-long hack to accounts in the Philippines to the laundering operations. All these actions suggest the involvement of a large organization, not just a small group. The involvement of Chinese nationals in the money laundering operation further emphasizes this, as China is North Korea's main supporter, and they share a close relationship and a border. The Lazarus Group is classified by many Western countries, with the United States at the forefront, as the most dangerous hacker group in the world. They may not be the best hackers, but they are among the top in terms of their ability to cause significant direct damage, largely due to the support they receive from North Korea. However, this classification wasn't solely due to the Bangladesh Bank Heist or the Sony hack. It came after their most infamous attack in 2017, which caused a huge stir worldwide. Those of you who remember will recall the massive disruption caused in 2017 by a malicious software called WannaCry. This program would infiltrate computers, encrypt all the files within, and make them inaccessible, then display a red screen with instructions. These instructions stated that your files had been encrypted and could only be retrieved if you paid a ransom. They give their victims 3 days to pay $300 in Bitcoin to a specified wallet address. The message also warned that if the payment was not made within the first 3 days, the ransom would double to $600, and if not paid within a week, you would lose your files forever. The problem was that the virus did not always return the files, even if the ransom was paid. It seems the program had bugs or hadn't been adequately tested by the Lazarus Group before being released globally. Essentially, it appeared that only about 1 in 3 affected computers managed to recover their files after paying the ransom. Despite this, no less than 57% of those affected by the virus, whether individuals or companies, paid the ransom. It is estimated that the hackers collected between $70 to $100 million. However, the real catastrophe wasn't just the ransom payments, it was the widespread impact of the virus. Those of you who recall the situation in 2017 remember the extensive magnitude of the incident. The virus spread to over 150 countries, infecting more than 300,000 computers, and tragically, it affected many critical institutions including hospitals, transportation agencies, railways, banks, and telecommunications companies. The biggest disaster was the disruption caused to these essential services and institutions. The global damages from the virus are estimated to be in the billions, which is why the Lazarus Group has been ranked as the most dangerous hacker group currently in existence. Let's return to the bank heist. What happened afterward? There were significant resignations, including the governor of the Central Bank of Bangladesh and a number of directors and officials. None of the hackers or the Chinese group involved in the heist were caught. In the Philippines, the only person who was apprehended and convicted was the branch manager, who facilitated the thieves in withdrawing the money. This manager, Maya Diquito, was charged with money laundering and was astonishingly sentenced to 59 years in prison, plus fined $109 million, which is more than the amount stolen. She was the only person prosecuted in this entire heist, raising questions about why she helped them. Was she bribed? If so, she should not have accepted anything less than $2 to $3 million, and then she should have fled the country immediately. This scenario raises questions. If Maya Diquito was indeed bribed, and knew what she was doing was wrong. It's baffling and hard to understand what her interest was in helping the thieves. Could she have been coerced in some way? There aren't many details on this matter. The sentence was extremely harsh. 59 years in prison and a $109 million fine have effectively ended her life, and she was the only one prosecuted in this case, almost like a scapegoat. Meanwhile, the hackers, the thieves, and the missing money seem to have vanished without a trace. This heist remains the largest digital theft in history to this day. As we move more into the digital age, it's likely only a matter of time before we see even larger digital thefts, with future conflicts potentially escalating into full-scale digital wars. And with that, we've come to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed it as usual. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell.